go ahead and get started. Just making sure over the next few minutes, some people will be coming in. So my name is Natalie Burkhart. I almost said McDonald. I got married last week. Thank you. 2 weeks ago. I'm the marketing manager here for KS. I'm here, so happy that you're here. You know, I say this every single time, but you being an active participant in your communities is only going to enhance things for everyone. And it's the same for us. We encourage education. We encourage you actively being a part of these communities, because that's what actually is going to move things forward. Staying organized, getting all of the information, not just from us, because we know that we're not the experts in everything. So that's why we bring in people like Kevin here from Building Reserves, who has the ins and outs and those details, those questions that we covered last time when we were speaking about budgets. Kevin's going to really take a deep dive into reserve studies as a whole. I have Chris Hancock here with me and Bradley Thompson from our mortgage division. You have any questions about anything mortgage association related? He's here all the time, 24/7. You can give him a call. Well, maybe not like at the middle of the night. That's not nice. You're like, don't encourage them. But again, you know, we found that there's a gap. Something needs, questions need to be answered. There's a lack of education. So we have somebody in-house that helps with mortgages. We have, you know, Chris with his years of experience in management and our entire team. And then I'm the marketing at end of it. So this is where we get to get the food. You're like, oh, she's here. She brings food for me. So I'll repeat it again. Please come to our expo. It's in mid-October, brunch and mimosas. And Kevin will be there. There'll be a bunch of vendors there with their swag, lots of free stuff for you guys, and a really great meal and some mimosas if you like to.
What's the date on that?
The 18th. And then when you go to our website, that it's very clear. It'll come up for you pretty easy with that pop-up. I'm going to have you go ahead and get started here, Kevin. We'll go into this reserve study presentation. He had actually presented to our team earlier, and I got a lot of great feedback. It's an excellent knowledge. I know that you wanted to know a little bit more detail, so I'll let Kevin take it from there.
Hi, my name is Kevin Bobb. I started Building Reserves about 20 years ago, and we specialize in creating reserve studies, mainly for townhomes, condos, and HOAs. It's about 90% of the business that we do, but we also do reserve studies for timeshares, cooperatives, churches, and other non-for-profit organizations. Okay. And here's my contact information, kbobb@buildingreserves.com. You guys have a business card, also has my phone number on it. We are headquartered in Chicago, so but we have engineers in 10 different states, including here in Michigan, okay, conducting reserve studies. And all of our engineers are employees of Building Reserves. Okay, we don't hire anybody that's a 1099 subcontractor. Okay, so here's just a quick overview of the presentation. Who here does not know what a reserve study is? What a reserve study is, okay. Who here has conducted a reserve study before on your property? One.
No, we didn't conduct what we haven't had.
You've had one done. Okay.
We've had several.
All right. I'm just trying to get an idea of the baseline of knowledge here. Okay. So here's a quick overview of the presentation. We're going to go over what a reserve study is and what are the benefits of a reserve study. Conducting a reserve study, what to expect. Also, what are the contents of a reserve study? How the projections for repair and replacements are made, okay, and scheduled. How costs are projected. We're also going to go through planning, customization, how to utilize the information in the reserve study. We're going to go through additional planning tools. You get an Excel file with the reserve study, okay, and that's powerful. Anybody here like to use Excel? Okay, okay, so we'll definitely play the Excel video then. All right, and then we're going to also go through the long-term use of a reserve study. It's a hypothetical situation. And then we'll also finalize it with selecting a reserve study provider and how to do that. All right. So what is a reserve study? So I'm going to explain in very simple terms what a reserve study is, and then I'm going to read this verbatim. A reserve study is basically a 30-year forecast for all the capital repair and replacement projects that need to be completed at your property. Okay. And the reserve study creates a funding plan to offset those costs. So we make sure you have enough money set aside for replacement of the roof, replacement of the streets, siding, windows, okay, everything that's commonly owned on the property. We have money set aside for all of those capital projects. Okay, so in simple terms, that's what a reserve study is. And I'm going to read this verbatim. So a reserve study is a long-term capital plan for properties and infrastructure and surrounding assets. It provides an in-depth analysis of the property's physical condition, as well as an evaluation of the financial health of the property's reserve funds. A reserve study includes a detailed list of property components that are commonly owned and maintained, including component quantities, ages, conditions, and useful lives. A reserve study will recommend replacement times for each capital asset, dependent upon the component's condition and available funding. A long-term funding plan is established to offset the costs of repairing and or replacing the various property components, and the reserve study will provide recommendations on how to best fund future capital repair and replacement projects. Okay.
Thank you for summing that up in the beginning, though.
Yeah.
You start reading and it's like,
Right.
oh.
Yeah. Because once I start reading, and it's just like, whoa, what is a reserve study? Yeah. So a reserve study is, again, it is simply a financial plan. It's a budgetary plan to set aside the appropriate amount of money needed for the major capital projects. Because if you're not setting that money aside every year or every month of every year, then you're not going to have the money available when you have a multi-million-dollar roofing project. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? All right. Because we don't want to do a special assessment or a bank loan to do these big projects, because that causes community fatigue. And if you're taking out a loan, a lot of extra money, okay, that you could have been saving over time. All right. All right. So the benefits of a reserve study. The main benefit of a reserve study is to avoid special assessment in loans. Okay, to maintain an accurate, detailed inventory of property assets, to maintain the market value of the property. There's many buyers that want to see a reserve study before they buy the property. Okay, it helps preserve the community appearance, helps to assist in the sale of the residence, helps reduce costs associated with deferred maintenance. It helps with equitable cost sharing between current and future owners. So when I read this bullet, it helps equitable cost sharing between current and future owners. Does anybody know what that means? Yes.
Could it mean that the current owners aren't deferring maintenance and the future owners would be stuck with it? So
That's exactly what it means, right? So you're spreading the cost of all capital repairs on the property from past, current, and future owners, meaning you are paying for your fair share of the usage of those common amenities. So if you live underneath the roof for a year, you're only paying for the roof for a year. Does that make sense? Chris had a great analogy earlier today. It's like a tollway, right? When you drive on a freeway and you pay for that toll, you're paying for the usage of that freeway system for that moment in time. It's the same way a reserve study works. Okay, spreading the cost amongst all people that are utilizing those common amenities. Okay.
I've got a number of communities that I've worked with where the boards like, hey, we're just going to put the base minimum amount in there, and then when we get close to a project, we'll do an additional assessment to cover any variance that we might need. And the problem with that is now you're putting the vast majority of that expense on the current owner. And there may be a new owner who just bought in, assuming that funding is taking place over the 20 years of the roof. When it come to find out, now they're bearing this huge expense where the prior owner got away with less assessments, you know, during the time they lived there. And that's not fair to that current owner when, you know, the past owner should have been paying their share along the way.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's when we get those calls from co-owners to Brad over here or the realtors we work with, and like, I didn't know that any of this was going on. So the transparency is necessary, and it really is helpful.
Mhm.
We get a lot of people that are very upset about that exact transition when that happens.
Right, right. And then think about someone that's coming in and wants to buy a unit at your association, and they want to see the reserve studies. They want to make sure that they're not going to hold the bag if they move in, right? They want to make sure that they get a fair share of payment, right?
Does the management company share that with the new buyer? Or
It
how does
depends on the state law. It depends on the law in the state. I'm not.
in Michigan?
So we actually educate realtors as well. We go and we do continued education for realtors, and we teach them what it's like to live in an association. We ask them, these are the things that you need to look at, because in order for them to do their job well and to have that person come back to them, to be loyal to them, they're going to need to have all the education too. So I don't think that it's not the law here, that a lot of the realtors we've met didn't even know what a reserve was.
In Illinois,
How do they get access to
in Illinois, it is law.
Mhm.
So it's a part of the disclosure documents.
In the state of Michigan, it's not currently in a legal requirement to have a reserve study. It's there. Last year, it was, put to committee to actually have it as a requirement in the state of Michigan, a legal requirement. It didn't get out of committee last year. It's been reintroduced this year. I know Kathleen, one of our senior managers here, she's actually on the CAA LAC committee, who tries to work with a lot of the legislatures to push things along, and they're really advocating for reserve studies to be a requirement. There's so many advantages to having it. So that's something they're really pushing for this year. We're hoping to see it happen. It is, a legal requirement in other states, not Michigan yet.
I'll say Kathleen's from Illinois too.
Yep.
It's totally different there than it is here.
Yeah.
It's a little more lackadaisical in the state of Michigan, but we're working on it.
Yep. And while it may not be a legal requirement in the state of Michigan, there's other federal entities that are pushing for it, like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae.
Mhm.
They've started to make it a requirement. If you want a, FHA loan, you have to have that kind of a documentation. And while not all loans are that, a lot of the mortgage is, and he can probably attest to it, end up getting sold. And if they want to be able to sell it to the higher, the bigger ducks, as it were, they have to meet all the same requirements. So it's becoming more and more of a requirement. And to go back to your question, because I know you're waiting for it, we're all about transparency. So we try to, when we get them, post them on the portal, and when they're asked for, we will share them. But it's not necessarily a set thing that everyone, when they're doing a resale, asks for.
So they, in your buyer wouldn't have access to the portal until after they're bought. So the owner who's going to sell will access the documents on the portal.
In an ideal world, but even if they ask us, I mean, if one of us resident or a real estate agent, came to me and said, hey, I'm looking for this, I'm all about sharing that content, because I don't want to be the gatekeeper of your information. I mean, we want to make sure that everyone's educated, because it's nothing worse than having a co-owner come in and be a new owner and they feel like they're blindsided. We want it to be a good transition. So we want to be about, transparency and clarity the whole time.
Okay. So the last two bullets: helps provide a credible financial health disclosure for future buyers, and fulfills the legal responsibility of the board of directors. Now, that doesn't hold true in this state. That holds true in 20 other states. Okay. I'm not going to name all states. Yeah. All right. So the benefits of the reserve study for management. So that's obviously ease of budgeting, because we have all those capital projects earmarked for every year. Scheduling, prioritizing, and coordinating capital projects. Reviewing vendor bids. So there's a lot of data in these reserve studies. So they can take this data, share it with the vendor in order to gather vendor bids. Also review vendor bids, because we have the data on how much it should cost per project. And so you can compare that to what the vendor is actually coming up with in terms of a price. And then maintain an accurate, detailed inventory of property assets. Oftentimes, your governing documents do not have really black and white information in what's commonly owned by the association. And a reserve study really goes through a step-by-step process to identify everything that is commonly owned. And if it's not commonly owned, then who owns it and who's responsible for it. Okay. So we create a responsibility matrix in the study, which I'm going to cover soon. All right. So we're going to start the reserve study process. So in the reserve study process, in the property investigation process, we're going to review all of your governing documents, your financial documents. We're going to go over your plat survey to define the property boundaries. We're going to create a component list of everything on site, okay? And we want to determine the responsibilities of all the assets on site, all the assets within your property boundaries. Okay, now if you live in a high-rise or mid-rise building, or you have a large clubhouse, it's important that you share architectural drawings with the engineer. Okay, that's doing the reserve study. We can get material lists, we can get mechanical lists, we can also get measurements of riser sections, which are the pipes that carry fluid to and from your units. Okay, those have to be replaced, usually around the 60-year, 70-year mark. And we can get all the data from those architectural drawings, and those are those things that are found behind the walls, because we're not opening up your walls. Okay. All right, so once we gather all this data from you, we're going to stick everything on site into one of 5 buckets in terms of responsibility and how it's paid for. Okay, the first bucket is the association reserve component bucket. So these are all of the items that are analyzed within the reserve study. Now, in this association, in this example, these are things like the roof, the soffit fascia, the paint, the siding and painting and repairs, the entry stairs replacement, the exterior light fixture replacement, concrete driveways, concrete sidewalks. So these are considered large capital projects that would be paid for out of the reserve fund. Okay, so the next bucket is considered the operating expense bucket. So these are not paid for out of the reserve fund. These are considered operating expenses. And each reserve study has an operating budget cutoff. Okay, typically the operating budget cutoff is between $2,000 and $5,000. Larger associations have a larger operating budget cutoff. Smaller associations have a smaller operating budget cutoff. So any cost that falls underneath the operating budget cutoff is paid for out of operating. Okay, anything above that cutoff is paid for out of reserves. Okay, so typically things like gutter and downspout cleaning, okay, paid for out of operating. Landscaping and ground improvements, paid for out of operating. There are exceptions when large trees are replaced. Sometimes you pay for those out of reserves if they're big enough. All right, light bulb replacement, touch-up painting, paid out of operating. You get the idea, right? So less insignificant expenses are paid for out of operating. All right, the third bucket is the long life bucket. A reserve study is a 30-year projection into the future. Everything that needs to be done in terms of capital projects. So if there are any capital projects that need to be done at year 35 or year 40, it's considered long-lived. Typically, these are things like the building foundation, building frames, okay? But again, okay, so if your building's really, really old, so if it's a 100-year-old building, you could have subsurface utilities that might need to be replaced in the life of the next 30 years, right? So what's considered at long-lived at one property, younger property, might not be considered long-lived at another property. But in this example, we're using foundations and building frames as long-lived components. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. All right, the fourth bucket is the homeowner's bucket. These are the items that the homeowners are responsible for paying for out of pocket. Okay. In this example, okay, now I got to remind you that it's different in each property, but in this example, it's windows, garage doors, entry doors, and balconies. Okay. So who here knows what a limited common element is? Limited common element. Okay, so all right, so limited common elements, and this is, I asked this question during the meeting earlier today. Limited common elements are things that only serve the unit. Okay, like a patio or a balcony that's only serving the unit. But if that patio or balcony or window fails, okay, and it can cause damage to a common element, oftentimes the association opts for that limited common element to be repaired or replaced by the reserve fund. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So when we do the reserve study,
A great example of that is I've got a community where they have balconies that are cantilevered into the building. And in order to replace that balcony, you have to open up the ceiling of the lower unit to be able to do that work. And that's going to be a very logistical challenge and administrative burden to try to coordinate all of that work. So in those situations, oftentimes the association will say, hey, well, we realized governing document wise, it's a common responsibility. The association is going to facilitate that work to make sure that A, it's, done to code and safely done, right? But also B, being able to coordinate between all the parties to make sure it happens, because not all the neighbors get along well together. So, while you would love that to happen, there's the reality that it might not. So we need to make sure it happens correctly. So having the association involved can have an advantage. Now, whether that's paid for by the association or a bill back, you guys can work out the logistics of that. But some communities will build it right into the study because it's just easier to fund that and make sure it's taken care of in that manner.
Mhm. Right. So when the engineer inspects the property, they initially want to actually treat a lot of the homeowner's responsibilities as commonly owned reserve assets. Okay, so we measure them, we take them off. We don't initially put them in the reserve study. We call them out as homeowner's responsibility, and we say, hey, would you like another version of the study, or would you like us to get you another draft of the study with some of these limited common elements in the reserve study? So it's very common when we submit the first draft of the study that an association is going to come back and ask for a revision. Okay, and we offer 2 sets of free revisions with each reserve study that we do. It's free. It's for 6 months after we submit. Yes.
So in this example, where you have something that is a homeowner responsibility in the governing documents, and then say it's decided to make an exception in like the example that Chris gave.
Yes.
That doesn't have to be changed to coordinate with the governing documents. It's just something that's going to be unknown in the reserve study, correct?
Well, it depends on how the board wants to deal with it. So in many cases, what they do is they push it into, they see the reserve study. They talk about the windows, like, hey guys, the windows are like $1 million in the next 10 years.
Okay.
Maybe we should phase those out and put them into the reserve study instead of having the homeowners pay for that, because we're gonna have a big problem on our hands if we have to all replace our windows. So let's put it in the reserve study. And then now that we put it in the reserve study, let's go to our attorney and change our governing documents. Okay. And that's typically what happens.
I was wondering because we're in the process of getting our very first reserve study ever.
Okay.
And we're working with our community manager to do that. And we're also in the process of needing to update our governing documents because there are the original ones. We're talking about a 35-year-old community. So I was trying to figure out, we're trying to determine the, egg, the chicken.
Reserve study first.
Okay.
And the reason being is the reserve study will look at everything. First off, it's a meeting with you, the management. It's an analysis of all your documents. And then it's an inspection. And then it's a first draft sent to you, right? And then once everyone has reviewed that on the board, then we can make a revision and finalize that reserve study, and then you can make changes to the legal documentation.
Oh, wow.
The attorney's not on site analyzing your property, and they're not trying to analyze dependencies. Just like Chris made the analogy or the example of the cantilever balcony causing problems to the unit below, right?
Yeah.
You can't analyze, an attorney can't analyze the property, the physical property like that. Okay. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
All right. And then the 5th bucket is other. So it's public streets, utility meters. So we want to identify everything on site and show who owns what. Okay. And then so we make this, what I call the nifty responsibility matrix. And you can see everything in the darker red is a reserve asset. Everything in here is operating, and then long life. So everything in the red here is the association responsibility. And then under owners, so the things that fall under owners could become a limited common element and come over to reserves. Okay.
So is that, so I've seen the maintenance matrix
Yeah.
that we, go over with people that are moving into associations. But I don't think I've seen with the actual reserve, category in there. It's usually like, co-owner or, association, which one it falls under.
Right.
So is that something that you produce or is that, or like what a usual maintenance matrix would have in it?
No, this is something that we produce. It's more in depth. It's
Yeah.
a little bit deeper analysis than your typical responsibility matrix that you'd see from an attorney.
Right, so that'd be more like board member facing or.
Correct.
Community manager facing.
Board
Gotcha.
member facing, and sometimes our matrix can actually change the matrix that the attorneys had created in the past.
Right, that's awesome.
Not all the time, sometimes. Yes.
Okay.
On the screen before there, on the bottom, it says something about utility meters.
Yeah, so we analyze.
Would the utility companies be responsible for?
Right, so that falls under the others bucket. So it's everything so we analyze everything on site and we put it into one of 5 buckets. And if it falls under others, right?
Okay,
So it's the municipality's responsible for it or the utility company's responsible for it.
Okay.
We have to call out everything on site to show that we didn't miss anything. Does that make sense? All right. So now that we've identified everything on site and we've,
Okay, Joe, he was gonna ask a question.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, to the previous screen, do you have, add the check boxes or X's? Are certain things like say concrete sidewalks into the boxes, depending on your threshold? Say we're doing some crack repair or whatever, it's a $5,000 job this year, like we might have it in operating, whereas we're doing significant concrete work, and that'll be out of the reserve. It's just maintaining the.
Right. So the way we always do phase replacements of concrete.
Yeah.
It's never all done at once because the way that concrete breaks down, there's good pours and bad pours. It's a unique component. Okay. So typically capital repairs and replacements typically always falls under reserves. And then the whole property is scanned in terms of where those concrete replacements need to be done. And it's all done at once. So it's not considered like a spot here, spot there. It's scan the entire property, fix all the problems with the entire property for the concrete.
A great example is light fixtures, right? If you have one light fixture that goes out, that's an operating expense to fix. But if you want to replace all of them, the entire association, that's a reserve expense. And in the study, they're typically going to look at it as, okay, light fixtures. As we're talking about financial planning, we're going to plan for a full replacement project, not planning for the miscellaneous one-offs.
Correct. Yeah. And that's one of the value adds to a reserve study. Good. All right. So once we've identified all the reserve components, the engineer walks through and takes hundreds of pictures of each component. Okay. And they're looking for things like curling and uplift of the asphalt shingle roof. Once your asphalt shingles start curling, that means they're getting older and brittle. Okay. And the flexibility is lost. It's a sign of aging. Okay. We're also looking for weak mortar joints. We're looking for cracking in the masonry, mortar breaking off if the property needs to be retuck pointed. We're looking for failing sealants or sealants laid over sealants or cracking sealants. We're also looking for things like cracking around catch basins or sinking catch basins. Okay, we're looking for all of these different conditions that would be found at all these different components. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify what the condition is, how critical that condition is, and when it needs to be replaced. And we're trying to show all those photos in the study to create a story behind why we're recommending this component to be replaced at this specific time frame. Yes.
And is this then in the component condition? Is this only outside stuff or is this stuff inside people's units?
So it's only the common area amenities. If there's common area amenities inside the units, then we'd go inside the units. Right. And the only time you have common area amenities inside the units is when you live at a cooperative. Okay. So that's typically the only time that we see that. So typically not for townhomes, condos.
So foundations are not a part of that then?
A foundation would be considered a common element. Okay. But typically they're considered long-lived in most cases, not all cases.
We have some pumps that we the association maintains and replaces and so on.
Hmm.
And units, say we have a building with 4 units.
Right.
So is that a reserve item or?
If it's above the operating budget cutoff, then yes.
Well,
And if we could do them all at once.
If you add them all up.
Yes,
every time.
then yes, you could consider that to be, and especially if the sump pit is serving multiple units. Okay. All right. So we're also looking for things like alligator cracking and fatigue cracking in order to recommend replacement of the streets. All right. And so everyone has a pamphlet here. If you open up your pamphlet, please. And so each component has a page that looks like this. Okay. It's what we call the component page. We try to fit all the necessary information in one easy to read page. And that page has 4 pictures. And within there, within that page, you have the unit quantity. So the unit quantity, so how much is present, the unit cost, the condition of that component, the age of the component, the priority, which I'm going to cover next, 4 pictures of the component, the customized replacement schedule. So the replacement schedule is down here. Okay. So that's when we're recommending that component should be replaced. And then the just on the opposite side of the page is the customized engineering comments. That is the engineer that inspected your property is going to write comments on there and why they're recommending what they're recommending. Okay. And we try to make it very easy to understand for people who have never seen a reserve study before.
So I can attest to that. Chris had showed me a reserve study, one of yours, and I had just purchased a home not too long before that, and it had a lot of the similarities to like an inspection report where every single one has a different screen, and then the notes are in there. It's unbelievably thorough, though, coming from the reserve study is way more in detail. I think it's such a huge value just because of what you're adding in, not just this needs to be fixed, but like giving timelines on things and like looking at the longevity of everything. As an association, I think that's priceless.
Yeah, great.
Do you use drones take some of these?
We do have drones.
Sorry, is
Yeah.
that a real picture?
Yes.
As well as people perhaps on the roof looking more closely.
It depends on the roof. We have certain limitations on certain roofs. We cannot go on top, but yeah, it depends on the roofs. But we do have drones. So now we're going to move into prioritization.
I've got a question.
Yes.
In regards to these dates that they have suggested those are suggestions, because what in the required dates to have replacements maybe not?
Oh, yeah. So we're just suggesting, yeah. So in our studies, when we have the recommended replacement schedule, that's when we believe that's our recommendation on when it should be
And
replaced.
at this point, that's what we think is going to happen.
Right. And sometimes it shifts out a year or it happens a year earlier. No. Yep. But we have to create that schedule in order to create your budget. Because without that, we can't create a budget. And if you don't have a budget, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Yeah.
One of
Right.
the things that I constantly have the conversation with boards and residents when we present a reserve study to them is they're like, well, do we really have to do the roofs in 3 years? And what I tell them is we may not have to. This is not chiseled in stone. It is a plan, and plans can change. But unless you are saving for the plan, you won't have the money when it comes due, if it is indeed that. And what we try to do as a best practice is when we know next year we're doing the roofs, this year we're having someone look at it, assessing it, giving us bids, so we have actual numbers to plan for next year. It's a plan, and that's the tool and the intent of it is so we're always going to try to get actual numbers and get people involved and engaged, and things can change, but we're using our best knowledge to predict sometimes a variable thing.
Correct. Yeah. So now we're going to move on to prioritization and why prioritization is so important in your reserve study. So there's 2 variables that we take in consideration when analyzing the priority of each component and when it should be replaced in your study. And that is condition and impact on livability. Impact on livability is simply what it means, what it says. So how, if a roof fails, how's that going to impact your life? If your landscaping fails, how's that going to impact your life? If your streets fail, how's that going to impact your life? Okay. So something that has a high impact on livability is something like the exterior of the building, a low impact on livability, but someone may argue this pool furniture. Okay. Right. So we take all of this data, and you can see we have more information over here on the pamphlet on the right-hand side about prioritization. We take condition, the two variables, condition, impact, and livability. So here's impact and livability. Here's condition. So condition's on the x-axis, impact and livability is on the y-axis. So if something's in poor condition and has a high impact on livability, it's a high priority item. Okay. So that's how we categorize something as high, medium, and low priority. Okay. It's much more, our system, our two-step system is much more accurate than someone just saying and thinking, oh, I think this is high priority. Okay. So this is the first step of our two-step prioritization process. All right. The second step and the third variable we take in consideration is desirability. So desirability is something that we also call intrinsic value. Okay, so intrinsic value is the degree in which a building, system, equipment, or material is favorable or attractive, or the degree in which intrinsic community value is added. Okay, so intrinsic value, I think a good example of intrinsic value, this is an example that I used earlier today, was what's more intrinsically valuable, or is it air conditioning unit more valuable in Alaska or in Miami? Okay, obviously it's more valuable in Miami. Okay, so we take a look at desirability, and then we come up with a priority score. So each component in your reserve study, if you have 20 components, then you have 20 priority scores, and it comes up with a finalized number on the priority of that component. And the reason why this is so important to actually have a prioritization system is because there might not be, the priority of the component might not be obvious without the system. An example of this would be, let's say you have a retaining wall, and that retaining wall is 15 feet tall, and the retaining wall is 25 feet away from the foundation of the building. Okay. In general, you would think a retaining wall would have, that big of a high of a priority. But now you're starting to look at the retaining wall, and you're starting to realize, wow, this retaining wall's 25, it's a 15-foot tall retaining wall. It's 25 feet away from the building. If the retaining wall fails, what could fail next? The foundation of the building. Okay. So by having an analytical system and looking at each component and having a prioritization score helps us really identify which component cannot be ignored and which components can be ignored. Okay.
Or not ignored, but deferred.
Deferred. I'm sorry. Deferred is a good word. Yeah. Not ignored, deferred. All right. So in the reserve study, how do we determine when the component should be replaced? What are the variables that we take in consideration? So condition, the condition of the component, the history. So what is the history of the component? Now we can find history by looking at your financials. Okay. If you guys are spending a lot of money at fixing something and we inspect the property and this item is in great condition, well, you just fixed it yesterday, right? And we can see that expense on your balance sheet. So history. And we can also learn about history by talking with you and management. The age of the component. So we take the age into consideration. How old is the roof? Not just only what is the condition of the roof, how old is it? Usage. How is it used? If you have exercise equipment, is it used every day, or is it just sitting there not being used at all? Prioritization. So what's the priority score? And then also concurrencies. We take a look at concurrencies when determining when a component should be replaced. For example, we recommend that the roofs should be replaced with the gutters and downspouts. And we also recommend that partial replacements of the concrete curbs and gutters should be done with mill and overlay of the streets. Why? Because if you can utilize one vendor to do multiple projects at once, it's going to save you a lot of money, okay? Especially if these are $1 million projects. Okay. And a reserve study typically only costs around $3,000. And you're going to save yourself a lot more money than $3,000 by having a plan. And not only saves you money on the vendor costs, it also saves you money on not getting special assessed, not getting bank loans. A reserve study is an asset. It's not just a document. It is an asset that is going to uphold the value of your community, and it's also going to save you money when it comes to large capital projects. All right. So now that we talked about the physical side of the property and when components should be replaced, now what we're going to cover is how we come up with unit costs. We're going to talk about the financial side of a reserve study. Okay, so there's the physical side of the reserve study and the financial side of the reserve study. We're starting the financial side. So we take three major variables. We get data from three major resources when coming up with unit costs. So we use RS means. This is a paid for database. Okay. And that database can zoom in by zip code and is updated quarterly for the construction projects or the unit costs we're trying to get for your construction projects. Okay. We also have built up an internal component database that we've built over 20 years. So anytime we do a reserve study, we get bids from management, we get bids from you. Okay. And we enter in all those bids into our database. So we have historical data. Okay. We also actually go to vendors and get actual unit costs from vendors when we can't find the information. So when it comes right down to it, we always come up with accurate unit costs. Okay. And, I would say we go to a vendor very rarely, like 1% of the time. It's when there's a very unusual type of capital project that isn't commonly seen. This actually happens a lot to us with churches. Okay. When you have to have a special restoration company come in to restore a 100-year-old building. Okay? They want it the same look and feel. All right. So the next step that we are going to take is set up your financial plan. And so we do a customized financial plan. We try to not increase the recommended reserve contributions all in 1 year. We try to spread out the increases over many years. Okay, we don't want to just hit you with a 20% increase the next year. So what we try to do is we try to defer low priority projects and try to focus on those high priority projects. Okay, we want to make sure if you're underfunded, your money is going towards those high priority projects. And then we also try to work within the constraints set by the board. Okay, because we don't want to give you an increase that financial increase that you guys can't adopt. Okay, the bottom line is we want to create a study for you that you will adopt and use. The document becomes absolute trash if you look at it and be like, oh, we don't want to put that much money aside next year. Okay, we want to find the middle grounds where you want to allocate that money and you want to follow the document. Because once you start following the document in 2026, guess what? You're going to follow it in 2027. And you're more likely to follow it in 2028. And now we got you on track slowly but surely. Okay, it's about adoption. Okay, and that's why prioritization is so important. Okay.
Well, and your engagement is critical to the success of this. It's only as good as the content given to them. They can only see so much when they walk the property. So you saw all of those different components, the history, the maintenance. Some pumps are a great, example that, may come up. Is like, okay, have you had to replace any ever? Well, if we already have a pattern of we're replacing 2 or 3 every year, and some pumps cost $250 to replace, hypothetically speaking, right? So we're spending $700 a year on some pumps. That's not a reserve. We're naturally just replacing them as part of our cycle. So we don't have to put that in there, versus other things where like, hey, we're just constantly having this problem that's non-typical. Our residents, this is our only entrance door to the building and they're really beating it up. We need to adjust the useful life to match what's actually happening on site. And that information, when you provide it to them, makes the document so much more powerful and useful. Mm-hmm. So taking your institutional knowledge, the management's knowledge, and that's where having our history with you, and being able to provide financials over the period of time, like here's 6 years, 7 years of, this pattern for this thing, gives them so much more content to work off, and it can make it so much more accurate.
It's a collaborative process. That's why we offer 2 sets of free revisions. And then we also offer an Excel file that allows you to manipulate the study, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So I want everyone to take a look at this center page right here, the center piece. This is our 5-year breakout. So this is the 5-year breakout of the reserve study. And in our reserve study model, we build in a projected inflation rate over the next 30 years. And we also build in the interest that you earn on your invested reserves, okay? And it's the weighted interest if it's in CDs or money market funds, okay? That's all built into the model. So you can see here on your fold out, you got the component page here, right? On the left-hand side. And you can see capital projects that we're listing down here, okay, where I'm pointing. You can see how that coordinates with the cash flow, okay? So if you look at the top here, look at the top of the page here, this is the graphical representation. And we got people online, so I'm gonna try to do this online as well. This is the graphical representation of the cash flow. This is the numerical representation of the cash flow. And then these are all of the expenditures. Each column represents a year, okay? So the reason we break this down into a 5-year, the 30-year cash flow into 5-year increments is because ultimately a reserve study is only good for about 5 years, okay? Because it has to be updated, okay? A reserve study is a snapshot in time. So this page right here is basically your plan. The green that you see here, the little green bar charts up is how much money we're recommending goes into the reserve fund. The red bar charts down is how much money we're recommending comes out of the reserve fund. The gray is the balance in the reserve account, okay? And then you can see these columns here represent a year, and these expenses for these roofs are falling in these 2 years, and these bar charts represent those costs. Does that make sense? That's really important to understand, because if you understand how that model works, you're really understanding the basic idea of a reserve study. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right.
I like the continual balance. It doesn't go like this, right? It's
Yeah.
like a little bit of a dip when you have a bigger project going on, but that's how the dream reserve account would look, right?
Right. Exactly. All right. So, all right. So with your reserves, that you get an Excel file, okay? And if you go back here, it talks more about the Excel file. Okay. You get an Excel file. And in that Excel file, you can experiment with what if scenarios. Who here likes to play with Excel? 1, 2. Okay.
It's the treasurers.
All right. I'll play the video then. You guys seem to be into it. Okay. All right. So when you get the Excel file, you can play with what if scenarios. You can change reserve balances. You can change inflation rates. You can change interest rates. Okay. And there's an auto funding function in there. You just hit auto fund, and it's called a macro. It's a program in the background that will auto calculate the recommended reserve contribution. It's really nifty, and it gives you a little bit of control. Okay. The original study that we create for you is always intact, is always downloadable for 7 years. So if you screw up the Excel file, you don't have to worry about anything. Okay. So when we create our funding plans, we create what's called a critical point. So the critical point is the lowest balance of the reserve fund over the next 30 years. In this example, the critical point is in 2041. Okay. So, and then we also set a low balance threshold, which is the blue line. So the purpose of the low balance threshold in the model is to tell the model, we don't want the balance to go below the blue line at any point in time for the next 30 years. Okay. So when we create your reserve study, we want to make sure that your balance is always above 0. Okay. So in this study, the threshold or the buffer that they have in this study is $600,000. So that's a $600,000 buffer in this example, which is a multi-million-dollar reserve fund, that they should not go under. Okay. Now, in other cases, you could set the blue line or the low threshold at $50,000 or $25,000 at a much lower buffer level. But the point is we're always funding you above zero. We never want to fund you at 70%. We never want to fund you at 50%. We always want to fund you at 100%. Because if we're funding you under 100% based on our financial projections, that means we're projecting for you to have a negative balance. Does that make sense?
In the state of Michigan, there's a statute that requires all condo associations to set that threshold. The minimum threshold is 10% of your operating budget on a non-cumulative basis. So that means is if you have $100,000 operating budget, and that includes what your reserve contribution is, so your total income for the year in all sources, your bank balance for your reserve can't drop below 10% of that total amount for the year. So that doesn't mean you only contribute 10%. It's your bank balance doesn't drop below that. So if $100,000 annual budget, you can't drop below $10,000. That's in your reserve budget throughout the course of the year. And that's what the Michigan state statute is. So if you drop below that, residents won't be able to get mortgages. There's a lot of things that impacts.
And that has nothing to do with our financial projections. That's just an arbitrary legal requirement by the state of Michigan. Okay. So what you should actually reserve is not that.
It's higher than that.
You should reserve a lot higher than that.
That's just saying your bank balance shouldn't drop below that.
And that's an important thing to know. That's really important to know as well too. Okay. All right. So this is an example of why it's important to update your study. So here we have a property that's built in 1987, and the developer conducted the first reserve study, and the developer recommended that they set aside, that each unit sets aside $10.49 per unit per month. Okay. Now I can use this interchangeably. Instead of saying a developer, I could say a unit owner create a reserve study in-house for the association, and the unit owner or the board member recommends that they set aside $10.45 per unit per month. And then the association or the board decided they wanted to hire a third-party reserve study provider. And they came back and they said, no, you got to increase that by another $2.55 per unit per month. Why is it important to have a third-party reserve study provider conduct a reserve study?
Got an invested interest.
We have no invested interest,
Fiduciary
none.
responsibility is like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
clear.
Okay, correct. Why would the developer have an invested interest?
They want to sell the place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They want to keep, the developer wants to keep the cost of living there low. Why would a board member have an invested interest? Same reason.
They don't want the other homeowners to shoot them down if they want to.
That too, right? Right. Then you got everybody pointing fingers, right? Okay. All right. 3 years later, and that's the reason why we're in business, right? That's why this is turning out to be a pretty big industry. So 3 years later, they updated the reserve study, and it's an update without site inspection. Okay. There are. I'm gonna make it bigger. Yep. There's 3 types of reserve studies. There's level 1, which is a full new study. Level 2, which is an update study with site inspection. And then level 3, which is an update study without site inspection. Okay. The level 3 studies are the cheapest. Okay. And you do a level 3 study when you don't need an inspection, when there's big macroeconomic changes, or only a year and a half has passed and you had an insurance claim and you need to revise the study. You need nobody to come on site. You don't need anybody to step on site. Okay. So that's what happened here. We had inflation hit. We readjusted all the numbers in the study to match the new inflation that hit, and the unit owners had to put aside an additional 30 cents per unit per month. Might not seem like a lot of money, but when you stay on track over a long period of time, it makes a big difference. Okay. All right.
Forget to click back on your side.
Oh yeah. Yeah. All right. I don't know why the numbers turned out like that, but okay. So 6 years later, the association opted to do an update study with site inspection. And it turns out that the sealants around the chimney caps and around the windows failed prematurely. Now, the reason why sealants fail prematurely oftentimes is because the bead that was installed was too small, and it was the sealants were installed under 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that causes the sealants to not properly adhere and can also cause them to prematurely crack. Now, the person that inspected the building they're not seeing the sealants fail at that point in time. Okay, they didn't realize that they're going to prematurely fail. So it's good that they had an inspection done, because when your sealants fail and you start to have cracking at the sealants around the windows and around the chimney caps, what happens is you get water back behind the facade. Once you get water back behind this facade from cracks in the sealants, you got problems. Okay, so we want to keep those sealants fresh and closed up with no cracks. And that change, because the sealants were replaced early, it increased the recommended reserve contributions by 42 cents per unit per month. You guys understand what I'm trying to get through to you here? You got to update the reserve study. All right. So 25 years later, the association has $600,000 in the account. They're like, why are we still putting money into this account? We have $600,000. I'd rather have this money in my own bank account so I can invest it and buy a bunch of Apple. Okay, I don't want to put it into this account, right? So, what could happen here now? Well, how could this money be used? $600,000. What would that $600,000 be spent on?
The roofs, the roads.
Exactly. And then the accounts would go back down to $20,000 or $10,000. Okay. But the point here is you have the money to pay for those capital projects. You're going to build that money back up for the next set of capital projects. Okay. That's the purpose. All right. Who's qualified to conduct a reserve study? So someone who has a CAI, a reserve specialist designation. So CAI is Community Association Institute. And they are the world's largest organization that manage the reserve specialist designation. Become a reserve specialist, you need to have conducted reserve studies for at least 3 calendar years and have conducted 30 reserve studies. And it is recommended, highly recommended. CAI doesn't enforce this because there's only 550 reserve specialists in the world. Yes, 550. It's recommended that you hire somebody with a background in engineering or architecture. Okay, the CAI will still give out a reserve specialist designation with somebody that does not have a background in engineering or architecture, which we are kind of arguing a CAI on. Okay, but they're doing that because of the limitation of people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wouldn't that kind of compromise if a person doesn't know? Wouldn't that kind of compromise the study then, because the engineer or the person that has the architecture degree knows to look at those things, like you said, from the drawings, the inner workings of something? I mean,
Yeah.
people like ourselves in the association, we don't have that knowledge. We want somebody that has that in order to give us those, those factors.
Right. And unfortunately, there are people out there that have the reserve specialist designation that have a background in finance or accounting, or they have a business administration degree. That's not recommended, but those types of people are conducting reserve studies. Everyone that conducts reserve studies at building reserves has a civil degree, architectural degree, mechanical engineering degree, has some sort of engineering or architectural degree. Okay. And we do that purposely because we believe that those people with those types of educations, with a background in the building sciences, can conduct a better reserve study. You know, that's the bottom line.
So we, our COO was, just moved into his presidency role with CAI chapter of Michigan.
Uh-huh.
And, all of our managers are, have credentials through CAI. We have our AAMC, which is the highest, credential that you could get as a management company. So you're not just looking for those things within the vendors that we work with, but we as a team are going to educate you and encourage you and to help guide you when you're selecting a reserve study contractors. Make sure that you get the best of the best. And that's a big part of what we do is our suggestions to you when we say, hey, maybe you should look into this business specifically, is because we work with them, we trust them. We don't just invite anybody into our doors. Right? You've got the experience to be here. And that is, I feel like there's a couple of little things, you know, takeaways, like when you do the reserve study and then change the bylaws. I think those things are, you know that so easily, but a lot of people don't know that. So I'm happy you're here, and I'm happy you guys are going to get some big takeaways from this, because I think there's a lot to glean from it for sure.
Well, and for me as a manager, I look at it as, you know, it's just like picking the right person, your right doctor, right? You know, you don't want to go to, you know, Billy Bob on the corner to get advice on your heart surgery, right? You want to go to a heart surgeon, and you're probably going to pay a little bit more for the heart surgeon than you are Billy Bob, but you're probably going to feel a little better in many reasons when you have the heart surgeon do your heart surgery, right? And so there are a bunch of different companies out there that do reserve studies. Some of them will probably end up being a little cheaper than building reserves, but I generally personally like utilizing their product because of they have the quality of people that are doing the work, that, you know, things that they provide you as an end product are usable, you know, and things of that nature. And so you're getting the value for your money. So when you do select a reserve study company to do the work, do a little bit of research on who you're doing, and don't just automatically go with the lowest price, because there is a vast difference in the product you will get.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if someone has this CAI, is that the CPA? I mean, is it a standard? You're saying you're CAI, what standard is that?
It's CAI standard. CAI standard is you have to get a reserve specialist designation, you have to have a bachelor's degree, okay, in anything, okay, and then have conducted reserve studies for at least 3 years under a reserve specialist. That's how you become a reserve specialist. And then you have to submit, I think, 15 of those 30 studies to CAI. They contact them and they review your work and see if they're happy with it, right, to give you the certification. We're saying we think that it can't be a bachelor's in anything. It has to be a bachelor's in the building sciences category, you know, civil engineering, architectural engineering, structural engineering. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Well, what was it, 550, right?
Yeah, 550.
Okay,
Yeah.
550. So it's so niche too, and hasn't been the standard for forever. So as more of these companies get together and start creating that product, the licensing will become a little bit more strict over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just getting there.
It's a supply and demand issue right now.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, you could trust in, you know, ask your manager, see who they've worked with. And that's the thing is Chris is, I don't know how many resource studies you've conducted, Chris.
A lot.
A lot, right? So he has a lot of experience.
I don't know if I'd qualify for the designation just yet, but I'm probably approaching it.
You have your degree and you have 3 years of experience right now. He's like,
Check. We'll add some, you know, initials.
Yeah, a quick question. You said earlier, reserve study would cost about $3,000.
Yeah, that's average.
I mean, just roughly, but does the cost of the reserve study depend on the size of the community?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously a huge community, high rise, might be more than
Yeah.
a smaller group.
Yeah. We've had the very, very large communities. We've had reserve studies cost as much as $60,000 and as low as $2,000.
Okay.
So really our baseline is 2,000.
Is it based solely on the number of units or the?
No, common
property?
it's based on the common amenities, like how many components do you have in your study? So the more components you have or common amenities you have.
We have like about 104 units. We've got probably more open land around us. than
Mhm.
any.
Yeah, so it's, are you
We've
single?
got two ponds that are maintained and one that's in the undeveloped area.
Okay.
So would those be considered extras?
Well, probably got ponds, streets, light fixtures, entrance monuments, right? So we're talking about 15 to 20 line items. It's probably like a $2,400-$2,500 reserve study.
Where he's referring to on the bigger expenses, if you have an airport and a restaurant and like businesses, like you have multi-mixed use community where you have all of these things that all add up to, more than say an HOA who has a monument sign in their roads, right?
Like we got the bid for Vail Resorts, right? So, one resort is like $50,000. Okay, so that's everything there. It's the chairlifts, it's the hotel, that's the restaurants, it's everything. So, and that's a more expensive reserve study. So you're talking about an HOA, entrance monument, stuff like that.
A struggling budget HOA.
Yeah, that's about $2,000.
You know, and you gotta have some tricks there because I think you're right. People always scream, every year I've been here, you've raised the dues, how awful you people are.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you're kind of preaching to the choir here. We understand that. How do we get people to buy into that? I remember when my neighbor said, I don't want to raise the dues. I'm going to die anyway. So I don't want to pay any more money.
Okay, so
So how do you get it buy?
Well,
What is the key?
the reason, well, the way I like to attack this is the reason they're not buying into it is because they don't want you to take any chunk out of their pocketbook. Okay. Well, one of the biggest assets they own is their home. Okay. And and depending on the community, the common amenities of their home could make up 10% of their home or 50 or 60% of their home. If those common amenities aren't maintained, there is no money in the reserves to pay for the replacement of those common amenities. The place is going to fall apart. And people are becoming more educated. Buyers are becoming more educated on buying units and looking at the reserve study before they buy units. The bottom line, if you're underfunded and you don't have the money to replace it, or you're hit with a special assessment, and that data is shared with potential buyers, guess
They're not
what? The
gonna
value
buy.
of your home is going down. And the amount of money you're going to be giving to your heirs is going down. That's why, because you're maintaining an asset. I mean, if you don't change the oil on your car and you drive it for 50,000 miles, how much do you think that car is worth? You want to buy it? You don't want to buy that car?
So it really comes down to, I think too, is they're paying for it slowly over time, or they're paying for it in a special assessment all at once, which is terrible. That's actually, people can't live there any longer because they can't afford it, or it just comes out of nowhere.
Right.
So, I mean, I know where you're coming from and it doesn't matter. But I think like we're doing the expo and we try to educate homeowners as well.
Right.
So they can understand like the bigger picture. We put these educational seminars onto our website, and I know they're not as invested as board members. They just see you taking their money, right? Or us taking their money, but they don't understand what it's going toward. But we try really hard to do that education on a broader spectrum to everybody in your communities, not just to you sitting here, but when we have events like that, and all the resources on our website, we hope to educate. But
And just a bit about on that from like a real estate mortgage aspect. When moving forward, when condos have like they have the reserve studies and everything's in place, like from a buyer's perspective, that's the gold standard. That's what you want. And like you said, people are starting to look at it. And if places don't have that in place, and places don't have that, it's being looked at like a depreciating asset. It's being looked like as it's a mobile home or, trailer or something like that, that's just depreciated every year. So people aren't wanting to buy them at value. And then the mortgage, a lot of the mortgages that majority of people qualify for won't even lend on it if it doesn't have a certain amount of reserves and the reserve studies and things are in place. So then all you have coming in is cash buyers, investors, and they're gonna low value on all your values as well. So
Right, and renting them out too,
correct,
right?
yeah, and renting them out, and then all the other stuff is gonna go off the amount of rental units versus primary residence, and things will get messed up really fast if you don't have the reserve studies in place moving forward. And because that's where the market's at right now, and that's where the real estate agents are looking at. Because they're getting calls from their clients 2 years later, hey, why didn't you tell me about this? So now real estate agents are more educated on asking for reserve studies and doing shit like that. I get calls all the time about it because I work here, and they're thinking, oh, I'll call me, and I'm the connection to here. So about all of our complexes, I get called all the time. So
That's a good explanation right there. And the big question, you want to ask yourself is, why do we need, I'm gonna die before we're gonna replace it. But the thing you need to ask yourself is, okay, are you gonna die in your townhome, in your condo? The answer to that question is probably no, you're not. Most people eventually move on, right? And they need that money. They need the money from their unit that they're going to sell for, end of life stuff. So that's just reality.
Well, I've got a community that I'm working with now that we recently just started managing, and the prior board and prior management deferred everything until everything was at, we'll call it critical mass, right? And now they've got a reserve study. They're making those steps to turn things around, but those people who want to sell their unit can't, because they've got a loan, they've stretched themselves financially to a point where they're at max limit. While they're making progress and they are turning things around, the units, neighboring communities are all selling for a premium, but they can't sell their units at all because the owners look, oh, whoa, I'll revisit you in about 6 years when you've gotten that turned around. And so you, as someone who wants to sell your unit, I have to give it away. I wish I would have paid things along the way. So now I'm in a position where I can.
That's a good argument. Yeah,
We really say too is transparency is key. So if you're having your board meeting, it's an open board meeting, you could speak to this and use examples, pull up this video on our website and play a small portion of it. You could take some the bigger takeaways of what Brad just said. I think that's where it really gets people, and they're like, wait, that's my money. That's my house, right? And if I want to move, I'm going to move. Well, you can't move because nobody wants to buy your house because you haven't been taking care of it or maintaining it. So sometimes adding in 5 minutes into the meeting and just really talking directly about how that works is super helpful.
Well, and for one of the communities that we just got a reserve study done with, I told them that it's going to be a process. You don't just get the study and you're done, right? Anticipate that you're going to get it out, send it to the residents, have an informational meeting with them to explain things. Your manager definitely can work with you on that and educate them along the way. So you've talked about this 5 or 6 times by the time you get to the budget season. And when you send out your budget, nothing's a surprise to anyone. They may not like any increase any more than you do because you have to pay the same amount as they do. However, they've all heard it. They've all had an opportunity to ask questions, read the documents, go, hey, I don't like it. It makes sense, right? I see the numbers. I see my building. I see the siding falling off. You're making a plan. I sent this out to one community and I got one person in a pretty large community that complained. The rest were like, you know what? I'm glad you're making an effort. You're putting together a plan to improve my community. You are now stepping up to take care of my asset. And I don't like the money being spent. I like the fact that you're taking care of it. And you're communicating that. You're bringing me along for the ride. I can see the effort. You're trying.
Yeah, it's a transparency.
And
That's exactly.
when you present it that way, you get far more buy-in than if it's just like,
Hey, we're
come
doing this.
October to November, here's a $50 increase, and they're like, what? Bring them along for the ride, provide them the resource. You've got now a third party who's backing up and, substantiating the information you're giving. It goes a lot farther.
Mhm.
So I ask you, Kevin, like, I think the price is amazing for the services that you offer and for the information that you get to walk away with as a board, I think it's absolutely essential to be able to have that as an asset for front facing for your community. If they had questions about things, like, here's everything, it's right here for you. Start building some reserves for your reserve study.
Yeah, that's why we called the building reserves.
There you go.
Right.
See, this is the marketing person right here.
Yeah. So in the back of these pamphlet, we have a list. We actually have more engineers than this now, but it's a partial list of our senior team.
Some people online wanted to know if they could get a copy of that. Are you
Yeah.
able to send that to Natalie so she can get it out when she sends the video and everything?
Oh, electronic copy of this? Yeah, I'll find one. Yeah, we've got electronic copy of that. Yeah.
So I will send that. So the PowerPoint presentation, the video, I'll do that, a little bit of editing and publish it on our website and send the link to that. And then I'll also include this. Anybody here, if you need anything else, if you have any other questions, or follow-up that you need, you have Kevin's card directly, you can contact him. And the same thing, like, reach out to us. We like to build things around what your needs are. And actually, I love it because our last educational seminar was on budgets, and then we go into this one, and then our next educational seminar is actually about preventative maintenance. So all of these are coming together, right?
Yeah.
So our KS team is actually going to present and go over the details of some of the things that you could do for preventative maintenance. And this would really just tie all of these three seminars together.
What's the date on that, Natalie? The next one, what preventive?
It's the second Wednesday of every month. I'm not exactly sure
Okay.
the exact date, and I'll put that out too. When I send the follow-up with this, I always have the next seminar ready,
Okay.
so you can register for that too.
The 10th,
Okay.
Yeah.
September 10th.
Thank you. September 10th.
And if you want to get a proposal, we have these proposal sheets here. That's if you want to, fill it out by hand and send it and email it to me, or there's a QR code on this, and you can just scan your QR code.
So were there any other questions online that we needed to address, or did you guys have anything else that you wanted to cover before we finish today?
Everyone that's commenting is just excellent presentation.
Oh, that's lovely. I like that a lot. Well, thank you so much for being here. Kevin, thank you. Did such a great
Absolutely.
job.